Hello, welcome back to another interview reading, this time some interesting bits from JPGamesDE in relation to that of Dawntrail, the reception of Dawntrail and the feedback that they're given and the movement of the development of Final Fantasy XIV going forward. That's why we're here today. An article that you may otherwise not see. It's an interesting point. It's quite a small one, but we're going to go through it. If you want to go and support this particular article, the link is in the description on JPGamesDE. They have full rights to this. I have none. I'm just reading through this because I think a lot of people probably won't get to see it, especially considering it's majoritively in German. There is an English translation that they put at the bottom though, which is incredibly helpful. So let's have a look at this. So JP Games say, you weren't surprised by the mixed reactions to Dawntrail? As you said here in Cologne a year ago, another year has passed since then and you've gathered a lot of feedback. Would you still say that everything is going as expected? Yoshi says, firstly, Final Fantasy XIV is a live service title. It is always the case that we constantly look at player feedback and we improvise based on what we see. Of course, from the time of 1 year ago, it's not the case that we could continue our development without referring to the player response at all. We're constantly adjusting and tweaking, improvising where we can in response to the player feedback when we're creating content. There is something that I felt particularly these past 3 months. Rather than it being the players of Final Fantasy XIV, I think in terms of the overall world, and what I mean by that is that it's not limited to Dawntrail, but in terms of the overall base game design for Final Fantasy XIV, I think there needs to be a restructure about how we approach the content hierarchy in games design, because content hierarchy is part of the game design. I started to feel recently, particularly, that the way things are structured in Final Fantasy XIV no longer matches the player's preferences, and this is something that I started to feel after we entered this year. And so, I felt that now we are at a time when we need to incorporate a major change in the content hierarchy and also the game's design, and this is limited not just to expansions, but to the overall development of Final Fantasy XIV. But when we look at the content hierarchy, we feel that it has worked well, as it was up until now. It has been employed right back from the time of A Realm Reborn up until patch 7.2, and it has always worked well until now. But now I feel that we need to advance more, change the content hierarchy, but also change the design itself within said hierarchy. It's worked well for the past 12 years, but now we feel, from our perspective, it needs to change, and we are excited about that change and the prospects of changing it for the future of the game. JP Games says, that sounds very interesting and above all substantial. Could you perhaps explain these changes in a little more detail? Yoshi says, if I start talking about this, I think I'll need 2 hours, he laughs. I talked a little bit about this in the last letter from a producer live, but I used some content to explain the first steps of this new approach. If players have not seen this yet, I would really appreciate if they could take time to watch that. For the first step in that direction, we'll be releasing new content in patch 7.35, so I'd really appreciate it if players could take the opportunity to play that content. I'd love to hear their feedback. It would also be great to hear whether they thought it was fun or not, or whether they have any specific feedback about things they want changed. This new content that will be coming in the patch is called Pilgrim's Traverse, so I'd really love if players do check it out and let me know their thoughts. Just as a side here, Pilgrim's Traverse is the new deep dungeon, that's the name of it, coming in 7.35, and they're making significant changes in terms of like the way that they can scale the content. There's a new duty at the end of it after floor 99 with a boss, and that can be changed depending on how many offerings you give upon it. It's basically a new difficulty scaling method, so you can put 15 offerings in to make it fairly simple, or you can put in 40 to make it an ultimate piece of content or ultimate difficulty in comparison. That's just the TLDR of that. So there's like a new scaling system for content. So continuing, I will try to provide a simple summary and I'll try to keep it short, he laughs. So when A Realm Reborn was originally released 12 years ago, of course that's the starting point for the game as an MMORPG, and it's inevitable that there isn't enough content in the game. Of course, when we want to introduce new content, we want to introduce and update it as quickly as possible. And in the starting days of an MMORPG, that is the only thing you can do to expand it. When we think about how we can efficiently produce content and quickly release it, that forms the basis of the base game design of the game and releasing content. And that basically formulates what we call the content hierarchy in the base game design of Final Fantasy XIV. I'll explain it in a hopefully easy to follow fashion, he laughs. We have hardcore battle content, casual player content, and mid-core content. If you have 2 types of each, that means a total of 6 types of content. From a developer perspective, we would broadly categorize the community of players into different groups, and we would plan based on that. We would release content based on that plan, tailored towards a specific group of players. That means as developers, when we're working on a certain type of content, we can think about this content being only for a certain type of player. On the other hand, for this type of content, he points towards hardcore content. When we're producing it, we don't have to think about casual players. For the past 12 years, we've carried out our development based on this policy. But if we continue to follow this policy, and to provide one example from the casual player's perspective, from their perspective, even though this content, that hardcore content, is implemented into the game, it's almost the same as being non-existent to them. And on the flip side, from a hardcore player's perspective, the content over here, the casual content, is also non-existent. But we say to them, refers to all the sweets, i.e. all the candy, all the content in the game. Hey, look at how much content you've got to play. So this policy we had went well, but I could say that it went too well, because now we've created so much new content that the players are telling us, oh, well, this content has nothing to do with me. I don't care. So what I want to say is, of course, for the top tier of players, we know that content tailored towards them is needed, and we'll continue to produce that content, right? More hardcore stuff. And on the side of the other spectrum, for the really casual players, we also understand that that content is also needed. So we're also going to continue to produce that, pointing at one of the casuals sweets, like in the candy bowl. So we will continue to tailor content for both ends of the spectrum. What we're trying to do now, though, is to change the design so that we have content that can be enjoyed by everyone, mixing those two things together, right? Those sweets in the bowl. So from these players' perspectives, pointing at the hardcore content players, there would be 5 types of content, and for the casual perspective, there's also 5 types, and to put it simply, that's it. Thank you, he laughs. He says, I tried to explain it really simple, but what we're trying to do will require us approaching all of the designs and also changes in the workflow, and I think that we're doing something new. It's necessary for us to move forward, and at this prospect I'm super excited. But this total concept of what we're doing, there's so much behind it that if there was an opportunity to get some sort of games conference and maybe spend 2 hours to talk about it, that would be great. At the end of the day, though, players don't really need to think about it that much. All they need to know is that the development team is working on something, and because of that, if players would be interested and motivated to provide us their feedback, that would be great, he laughs, end quote. So essentially, they're talking about what was already discussed before about the scaling content. We gave the example of Pilgrim's Traverse, but this is not just going to be limited to Pilgrim's Traverse. There have been in other interviews and in the live letter part 88 mentions from Yoshi P himself that they're talking about making variant mode scale the same way. So instead of perhaps having lots of different difficulty like variant, criterion, savage, there would be a scaling system just built into the variant mode itself, which is quite interesting. They also mentioned examples in the second Forked Tower instance. Yoshi P wants to apply it to that sort of situation so that every piece of content that you would normally expect to see in a patch has something for everyone. However, there will still be limitations, right? It'll always be the sort of content like Island Sanctuary that will tailor to people who want to do Island Sanctuary. There will always be an ultimate raid that would probably only ever tailor to the ultimate crowd, right? You're still going to have those extremes of both sides, but for the rest of the content, it's going to meet in the middle, and somebody who does Savage Raiding will have some reason to do a variant mode, you know what I mean? I think the way that they're going to have to approach this is also in a reward scheme as well. They're going to have to tailor that hierarchy around the rewards more than just the scaling of the content. You have to also admit that that is a huge concept, not just scaling damage, health, you know, how difficult something is to pull off, but also mechanically, right? So the example of Pilgrim's Traverse, that boss that we talked about, is supposedly affected not just in the boss's health, how much damage it does from light or dark damage, right? Magics. It's also the more offerings that you put into that, up to 40, the mechanics themselves change. New mechanics are added to the fight. So if you think about it from that perspective, approaching all of that mid-core content, or all of that content that would ordinarily not interest a hardcore raider, for example, a variant mode, having that scaling system means that you're going to have to put quite a lot of development time into making that stuff work. But also, there's no point putting in that extra work if the reward structure isn't good enough, right? No one wants to do a particular piece of content because there's less rewards from it. No one is going to go and do the Criterion mode when the items majoritively are market tradable. You know what I mean? Like, there needs to be something for you to go and tangibly acquire. I know there was the shiny version of tome weapons that you could get from Criterion, right? I know someone's going to put that in the comment section. But that's not enough for the majority of people to want to go and do something, especially when, like, the mounts are market tradable. You know, I guess titles are the only other thing, but there needs to be something substantial for somebody to want to go and do that. It's not necessarily just the difficulty of the content itself and the challenge, but also what you get out of it. What's the prestige that you get to go, hey, look, I did the harder version of what this other person did, you know what I mean? And then maybe encourage that person to step it up and scale that difficulty up slowly. That's the progression, you know, the natural progression of difficulty, how it should be approached in a game. Rather than doing different difficulty modes, it should be, you know, something that you can step up. And I like that idea on concept. Will they pull it off? That is the big question. And they are seemingly changing the way that they're directing the game based on the feedback they've got from Dawntrail, and they're taking it to heart, which is important as a developer and a series of developers to go, right, okay, Dawntrail is only, you know, for whatever reason that people may have for not wanting to play it or quitting from it, it has also highlighted the bigger, broader problem that's basically a 12-year-old problem, where other live service games have changed and, you know, changed their policies, changed their design philosophy. Things were a lot different. Like, an MMORPG from 12 years ago compared to 2025 is drastic, you know, very drastic. That being, there's not many of them as well. There's not many MMORPGs that have survived 12 years, let's be perfectly honest. That's the other concept. Anyway, interesting little article, nice little interview. Obviously, this is on a German website, but if you want to go give it some love, go to JPGamesDE. A link will be in the top of the description. And I enjoyed reading through this, and I thought it was worth sharing. The more we get out of this, the more build up towards 7.35 we get, the more the money is on 7.35, right? Will it be the wonder patch? Will it save the game in the eyes of both the developers and also that of the, you know, the paying consumer? It's going to be an interesting turning point. It really is, because it has the potential to change the game forever, for better or worse. So we'll have to wait and see. I'm really excited for that patch. Hopefully we get some more news as to when it's releasing soon. But yeah, until then, more videos on the way from 7.31 and any other bits that we get from Gamescom, or PAX is coming up as well, so we'll probably get more interviews there. Anyway, much love, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you all next time.